If your very own family members, your brothers, your closest friends, betrayed you and threw you into a deep pit, would you be able to forgive them? Imagine yourself in that situation. Betrayal from a stranger is already a wound, but betrayal from your own flesh and blood feels like a dagger driven straight into your heart. And yet, in the Bible, there was one man who endured exactly that kind of pain. But instead of clinging to resentment, he chose a completely different path. That man was Joseph, one of the most remarkable figures in the book of Genesis. His story is not only a tragedy of betrayal, but also a powerful testimony of faith, compassion, and a capacity for forgiveness that goes far beyond what most people can imagine. Joseph did something many would call impossible. He was hated by his brothers and sold off like an object. He was thrown into slavery, stripped of his freedom, and later falsely accused and cast into prison. But when the chance for revenge came, Joseph chose a completely different response. He forgave. And not only did he forgive, he opened his arms and saved the very family that had once betrayed him from a devastating famine. Let us explore together how Joseph was able to forgive, and ask ourselves, could you, could I, could we do the same? The context of betrayal. Joseph was not just an ordinary son in the large family of the patriarch Jacob. He was special, born from the deep love Jacob had for his most beloved wife, Rachel. Because of that, from a very young age, Joseph received far more attention than his brothers. The multicolored robe that Jacob gave him was not simply a gift. It was a clear symbol of favoritism, a sign that everyone could see. But to his brothers, that robe was like fuel poured onto a fire of jealousy that had long been smoldering. Every time they saw Joseph wearing that dazzling robe, they did not only see their younger brother being spoiled, they also saw themselves being overlooked. And soon, that resentment grew into hatred when Joseph shared his strange dreams. In those dreams, Joseph told them that he saw their bundles of grain bowing down to his bundle. Then, in another dream, he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing before him. What might have seemed like harmless stories cut deep into his brother's pride. Who does this little brother think he is, that we should bow down to him? They whispered in their anger. The peak of their hatred came when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers as they tended the sheep far away. From a distance, as they saw him coming in his brightly colored robe, shining under the sun, their jealousy erupted into a ruthless plan. Look, here comes the dreamer. Let us kill him and see what becomes of his dreams. That was the cold, chilling plot they whispered to one another. In the end, they did not kill Joseph. But what they did was perhaps even more brutal. They tore the robe from his body, threw him into a deep pit, and later sold him as a slave to a passing caravan of Ishmaelites. Cold silver coins were exchanged for Joseph's freedom and youth. While he was dragged away from his family, from his homeland, from the father who still loved and waited for him every single day. Now, try to imagine yourself as Joseph in that moment. Yesterday, you were the cherished child in the arms of your father. Today, you have been deceived, tied up, and dragged away like a piece of merchandise by your very own brothers. Your cries echo in the air, but all you receive in return are cold stares and terrifying silence from those who once grew up beside you. That feeling must have been complete collapse, the loss of freedom, the loss of trust, and most painfully, the loss of the home you once thought would always protect you. This was the very first and deepest wound in Joseph's life, the wound of betrayal. And it did not come from a distant enemy, but from his own flesh and blood. This is also where the story of forgiveness begins. When a person faces the deepest pain, only to later reveal the extraordinary power of mercy. From slavery to prison after being sold by his brothers, Joseph was taken to Egypt, a foreign land with a strange language and a distant culture. From being the cherished son of his father, he suddenly became nothing more than merchandise in a slave market. And destiny brought him into the household of Potiphar, an officer who served as the captain of Pharaoh's guard. To many people, a slave was nothing more than a tool to be used. But Joseph was different. Even though he had lost his freedom, even though his heart was still bleeding from betrayal, he did not allow bitterness to corrupt his character. He worked with faithfulness, diligence, and wisdom so remarkable that Potiphar quickly recognized there was something extraordinary about this man. Everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper, seemed to be blessed. So Potiphar entrusted him with the management of his entire household, his fields, and all his possessions. But just when things seemed to be improving, another trial came crashing down. Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's youth and integrity, tried repeatedly to seduce him. Yet Joseph firmly refused. He said, "How could I do such a wicked thing against my master's wife and sin against God?" That firm refusal became the very reason for false accusation. In her anger and humiliation, the woman accused Joseph of trying to assault her. Potiphar, burning with fury, did not bother with careful judgment. He immediately threw Joseph into prison. Once again, Joseph fell from a place of honor to the lowest depths, from slave to steward, and now to prisoner. Locked in the darkness of a dungeon, most people would sink into bitterness, despair, or even lose their faith. But Joseph was different. He did not allow the darkness to consume him. He continued to live faithfully, not only toward the prison guards, but above all, toward God. The Bible records that God was with Joseph and caused him to find favor with the warden. Even in the damp prison, Joseph shone with wisdom and unwavering faith. The warden entrusted him with responsibility for the other prisoners. A prisoner himself, yet treated with the trust of a manager. Was that not a paradox? Now imagine yourself in that place, imprisoned for a crime you never committed. You know you are innocent, yet no one defends you. Would you blame fate, curse God, or rise in rebellion? But Joseph chose another way. He chose patience. He believed that everything happening was part of a greater plan, far beyond his understanding. It was in that very prison that Joseph met two significant men, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, both of whom had been imprisoned. They each had strange dreams, and Joseph, by God's gift, interpreted them correctly. One would be restored to his position, the other would be executed. Everything happened exactly as Joseph had said. And then Joseph asked for only one thing. When you are restored, remember me and speak of me to Pharaoh. But as the years passed, the man forgot about Joseph. He remained in prison, waiting in silence. And yet, what is astonishing is this: Joseph did not break. He kept his faith, he remained faithful, and he allowed hope to keep burning quietly within his heart. Instead of drowning in bitterness, Joseph showed extraordinary patience. And that very patience was preparing him for a turning point that would change not only his life, but the destiny of an entire people. The turning point of power. Time in prison kept passing by. Joseph remained quietly faithful until one day an unexpected event changed his life forever. Pharaoh, the supreme ruler of Egypt, was troubled by strange dreams. In one vision, 7 healthy, fat cows were devoured by 7 thin, sickly cows. In another, 7 full heads of grain were destroyed by 7 withered and empty ones. All the magicians, soothsayers, and wise men of the kingdom were helpless. No one could interpret the meaning. At that moment, the chief cupbearer, the very man whose dream Joseph had interpreted in prison, finally remembered him. He told Pharaoh about a prisoner with a unique gift. Immediately, Joseph was summoned from the dungeon. After years of being forgotten, he now stood before the most powerful ruler of his time. Pharaoh asked, "Can you interpret this dream?" Joseph humbly replied, "It is not I, but God, who will give Pharaoh the answer of peace." With wisdom from above, he explained that the 7 fat cows and 7 full heads of grain represented 7 years of abundance. The 7 thin cows and 7 withered heads represented 7 years of severe famine that would follow immediately after. Then Joseph gave counsel. Pharaoh needed to appoint a wise man to establish a system to collect grain during the 7 plentiful years, to store it for the 7 years of famine. This interpretation was not only accurate, but also came with a practical plan. Pharaoh and his officials were astonished and said, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" And so, Joseph was instantly elevated to the position of the second most powerful man in all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Pause for a moment and imagine it. A man who was once a slave, falsely accused, and cast into prison, now wore royal garments, bore Pharaoh's signet ring, rode in the second chariot of the kingdom, and everywhere he went, soldiers shouted and people bowed. From the lowest pit, Joseph was lifted to the highest peak, a miraculous turning point that only God could orchestrate. And Joseph did not waste that opportunity. During the 7 years of abundance, he organized the gathering of grain across Egypt, storing it with wisdom. When the 7 years of famine struck, people from every land came to Egypt to buy food. The entire world depended on Joseph's careful management. Joseph now held power in his hands. If it were you, standing at the summit, holding all authority, would you forgive those who once harmed you, who tried to crush you? Or would you use your power for revenge to make them pay for their betrayal? That question became the most critical crossroad in the story. Because, not long after, the very brothers who had betrayed Joseph came to Egypt seeking food. They stood before him, bowing and pleading for help, without realizing that the powerful ruler before them was the very brother they had abandoned. From the height of power, Joseph now faced his greatest test, not hunger, not chains, but the trial of the heart, forgiveness or revenge. And it was here that the story reached its most compelling moment, where the true greatness of Joseph would be revealed. The reunion with his brothers, the 7 years of abundance passed quickly, and the fierce famine began to spread across the lands. In Canaan, Jacob's family was exhausted, their food completely depleted. With no other choice, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt, where vast storehouses of grain were managed by a powerful official. When Joseph's 10 brothers arrived, they entered the palace and bowed low before the mighty ruler. All they saw was a dignified Egyptian official dressed in royal garments, speaking through an interpreter. They had no idea that this man was Joseph, the younger brother they had once sold like a piece of merchandise. But Joseph recognized them instantly. His heart tightened as he looked into their familiar faces, the very ones who had laughed while throwing him into a pit, who had coldly counted the silver coins in exchange for his life. And now, here they were, kneeling and pleading for food from his very hands. That moment was an intense inner battle. Painful memories flooded back. Betrayal, loneliness, endless nights in a foreign land. Joseph now had the power to do anything he wished, to punish, to retaliate, or to cast them into the same despair he had once endured. Yet, at the same time, he longed to know. Had these men remained the same, or had they changed? Joseph did not reveal his identity right away. He decided to test them. First, he accused them of being spies. In panic, they begged for mercy, explaining their family story, mentioning a youngest brother named Benjamin and an elderly father, Jacob, still waiting back home. Joseph listened, his heart stirred, but outwardly he remained stern. He imprisoned them for 3 days, then released them all except Simeon, whom he kept as a hostage, demanding that they bring Benjamin to prove their honesty. When the brothers returned with Benjamin, Joseph prepared a feast for them. Seeing Benjamin, his only brother from the same mother, Joseph was overwhelmed. Tears welled up, and he had to leave the room to weep before returning with the calm demeanor of an Egyptian official. But inside, the struggle only grew stronger. Joseph tested them once more. He ordered his silver cup to be hidden in Benjamin's sack of grain, and then accused him of theft. When the guards searched, the cup was found, and Benjamin was seized. At that moment, the brothers all stepped forward, pleading for mercy, willing to sacrifice themselves to protect their youngest brother. They were no longer the selfish, indifferent men of the past. They had learned love, loyalty, and the courage to redeem their mistakes. Standing before this scene, Joseph's heart surged with emotion. Years of resentment, the wounds of the past, all rose up at once. He could end the story with revenge, or he could open a new chapter with forgiveness. The decision was his alone, a decision that would determine not only the fate of the men before him, but also the future of his entire family. The story lingers at that tense moment. Joseph stood on the razor's edge. Revenge or forgiveness? Just one breath more, and everything would be revealed. The moment of revelation. The atmosphere in the Egyptian palace that day was heavy. Joseph's brothers, men from distant Canaan, were kneeling on the cold stone floor, trembling as they awaited judgment. The silver cup had just been discovered in Benjamin's sack, and the powerful official, Joseph himself, had pronounced them guilty. To them, it seemed like the end. One brother condemned, the entire family doomed to perish in famine. But for Joseph, the storm within was far greater. Before him were not just offenders, but his very own brothers. They were the ones who had left him in a pit, who had sold him into slavery. Those memories were wounds that had never fully healed. Yet, at the same time, they were also the ones who had shared meals with him, who had laughed and played with him, who had grown up together under the tent of their father Jacob. Joseph's eyes rested on Benjamin, the youngest brother, now grown, yet still carrying the gentleness of his youth. Joseph's heart ached. He remembered his beloved mother Rachel, long gone. He remembered his aging father, still waiting day and night. And when he saw his brothers willing to risk their lives to protect Benjamin, Joseph realized they were no longer the men they once had been. His body trembled. His breath grew unsteady. Tears began to well up, blurring the sharp gaze of the Egyptian official. Joseph turned away, trying to hide it, but the tears could no longer be held back. For years he had restrained himself. For years he had buried his pain. But now it all burst forth. Joseph ordered all attendants and guards to leave the room. The doors closed. Only he and his brothers remained. Then came the sobbing. At first muffled, choked cries, then breaking out into a wail so loud it echoed down the halls. The Egyptian servants outside heard it, and soon the word spread. The mighty official was weeping. With tears streaming down his face, Joseph could no longer hold back. He lifted his head, looked directly at his brothers, and spoke in Hebrew, the familiar tongue he had not used before them in so many years. His voice trembled, but the words rang clear. I am Joseph, the brother you sold into Egypt. The air froze. His brothers stood stunned, paralyzed. Eyes widened, disbelief written on every face. The powerful ruler they had feared these past days was none other than their long-lost brother. The truth struck like lightning from a clear sky. They trembled, stepping back, their faces drained of color. Guilt surged over them like a raging flood. In that instant, they saw the price they deserved: punishment, prison, even death. No one dared to speak, for no words could excuse the crime of betraying their own blood. Joseph looked at them. Tears still fell, but his voice grew steady. Do not be afraid. Do not be grieved, and do not blame yourselves. For it was God who sent me ahead of you to preserve many lives, still trembling. His brothers bowed low, unsure if such forgiveness could be real. But Joseph stepped forward. No distance remained, no mask of Egyptian authority. He opened his arms wide, moving close to each of them. The barrier shattered in that instant. The betrayed one embraced the betrayers. He threw his arms around Benjamin, weeping aloud like a child. Then he embraced each brother, one by one, their tears mingling, their sobs washing away years of hatred. Accusations melted into the sound of weeping, into the strength of a brother's embrace. That moment was not only a family reunion, it was Joseph's own release. Years of bitterness, countless nights of torment were finally let go. He chose forgiveness, not because his brothers deserved it, but because he knew resentment only chains the soul. Forgiveness was the key that opened the door to true freedom. Outside, Egypt remained mighty, and famine still ravaged the land. But within that room, a miracle had taken place. A miracle, not of overflowing granaries, but of a heart that chose love instead of vengeance. The moment Joseph revealed his identity was the climax of the story. It marked the turning from tragedy to hope, from darkness to light. From that moment forward, the history of Jacob's family and the destiny of the entire nation of Israel took a new path, the path of salvation and mercy. The words of forgiveness and the plan of God. The room slowly grew quiet after the sobbing. Joseph's brothers were still stunned, unable to believe what had just taken place. The brother they had sold, the one they thought was gone forever, now stood before them. Not only alive, but second in power over all Egypt. Fear still gripped their hearts. Deep down, each one thought, surely now he will take revenge. Who could blame him? All his years of suffering were because of us. And so, when Joseph said, "I am Joseph," they remained silent, their faces to the ground, not daring to look up. But Joseph stepped closer, his eyes still wet with tears, yet filled with compassion. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. "Do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me. For it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Those words cut like a sharp blade, yet they also healed like a refreshing stream. His brothers were astonished. They had expected condemnation, but what they heard was comfort. Instead of focusing on the betrayal, Joseph saw a greater meaning in everything that had happened, a divine plan beyond human schemes. Joseph continued, "For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land. And for the next 5 years, there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve a remnant for you on earth, and to save the lives of many. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me an advisor to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over all Egypt. Every word he spoke was not only an explanation, but also an act of complete forgiveness. He did not deny the pain he had endured, but he refused to let it imprison his soul. He saw God's purpose to turn human evil into good, to bring life to an entire people. The brothers began to lift their faces, their eyes red with tears. Trembling as they looked at Joseph, they saw no trace of hatred in him. Instead, Joseph opened his arms wide and embraced them one by one. He kissed Benjamin, then kissed each of his brothers. The sound of weeping filled the room again, but this time it was not the sound of sorrow. It was the sound of reconciliation. In that moment, the past was closed. The deepest wound, the betrayal of blood, was healed by love and by trust in God. Joseph did not stop with words of forgiveness. He also thought ahead for the survival of his family. "Hurry back to my father and tell him, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, because 5 years of famine are still to come." In Joseph's words, there was no trace of a victim, and no tone of a conqueror granting favor. It was the voice of a loving son, a devoted brother, and above all, faithful servant of God. He knew that if he held on to hatred, he could make his brothers pay, but by forgiving, he could save a nation. And that was the path he chose, the harder path, but the higher one. In this forgiveness lies an important truth. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or denying the pain. Joseph still remembered every detail of the day of betrayal. But forgiveness is the decision not to let the past control the present or the future. Forgiveness is choosing to see God's hand guiding even in the darkest of circumstances. As Joseph explained God's plan, he was also teaching his brothers a lesson. Human sin is real, but the power and grace of God are greater. What they intended for harm, God had turned into a means to bring life to many. That moment became one of the most powerful testimonies in the Bible about God's providence. No event is meaningless. Even the cruelest betrayal can become an instrument in the hands of the Almighty. And in that moment, a broken family was restored. A relationship thought beyond repair was reborn. Joseph's embrace was not only forgiveness for his brothers, but also a testimony that mercy can triumph over hatred. From this point on, the story was no longer about betrayal. It became a song of salvation. Joseph bore witness to an eternal truth. Humans may intend evil, but God can turn evil into good, bringing life and hope. The power of forgiveness. After Joseph wept and revealed his identity, the cold chamber of judgment was transformed into a place overflowing with family love. Embraces, tears, and astonished yet joyful looks replaced fear and guilt. But the story did not end there. Joseph did not forgive only with words. He proved his forgiveness through tangible actions. He did not let his brothers return with lingering doubt or fear, but entrusted them with a new mission: to bring good news to their father Jacob. He instructed them, "Hurry back to my father and tell him that I am still alive. Tell him I am the ruler of all Egypt. In the land of Goshen, I will provide for him and for the entire family, because 5 more years of famine remain. Without this, the whole household will fall into ruin." Joseph even sent wagons, provisions, clothing, and wealth to carry back to his family. He was not only concerned that they might survive, but that they might live safely and abundantly. This was the clearest sign of true forgiveness, not partial, not merely inward, but forgiveness expressed through concrete acts of love. The brothers departed, carrying news that no one could have imagined. The son, Jacob, had mourned as dead was alive, and had become the most powerful man in the land. When Jacob first heard it, he could not believe. But when he saw the wagons loaded with goods and heard his son's words, his heart revived. He exclaimed, "It is enough. My son Joseph is still alive." Jacob, old yet filled with new hope, set out with his whole household for Egypt. When they arrived, Joseph rushed to meet his father. The scene was deeply moving. Joseph, once the mighty ruler, now weeping in the arms of his aged father. Years of separation, years of thinking they would never see each other again, were healed in one heartfelt embrace between father and son. Joseph settled his family in the land of Goshen, fertile ground near the Nile, ideal for their flocks. There he provided for them fully, ensuring they no longer feared hunger. From a family on the brink of extinction, they were saved and secured in the heart of powerful Egypt. Here the story reveals the deeper meaning of forgiveness. If Joseph had chosen revenge, his brothers would have perished. Jacob would have died in sorrow, and the family would have been destroyed. But because he chose forgiveness, the ending was entirely different. Tragedy turned into reunion. Extinction turned into the foundation of what would become the nation of Israel. Forgiveness set Joseph free, but it also set his entire family free. It healed old wounds and opened a new path forward. Forgiveness does not erase the past. The betrayal still happened, but it changes the way the past shapes the present and the future. The power of forgiveness lies in this: it does not depend on whether the other person deserves it. It depends on the choice of the one who forgives. Joseph's brothers did nothing to earn such mercy. They had betrayed him and caused immeasurable pain. But Joseph did not forgive because they deserved it. He forgave because he refused to let resentment rule his life. He chose the higher road, to release and be free. Forgiveness also comes from the ability to see beyond the present. Joseph understood that his brother's betrayal, as cruel as it was, still fit within God's greater plan. Because he was sold, he came to Egypt. Because he was in Egypt, he became the one who saved his family and many nations. He recognized God's hand even in the most painful events. From that perspective, forgiveness was no longer just a moral act. It was participation in God's great design. It became the way a person could join in his work of salvation. The image of Joseph providing for his father and bringing his whole family to safety was not only a picture of filial devotion. It was living proof that forgiveness creates life. From betrayal and from wounds came a new beginning, stronger and deeper. And it was from this land of Goshen that Israel's people grew strong, becoming a great nation in the centuries to come. It all began with one decision, Joseph's decision to forgive. When we step back and see the whole picture, we realize that the power of forgiveness does not stop at one family. It reaches into history itself. Forgiveness can change the destiny of generations. It is the bond that restores what was broken and the seed that blossoms into tomorrow's hope. Forgiveness in life. Today, the story of Joseph is not merely a tragedy and a miracle from the ancient past. It is also a mirror reflecting our own lives today. For although thousands of years have passed, people still face the same familiar wounds: betrayal, injustice, and hurt from those closest to us. And just like Joseph, each of us stands at a crossroads: resentment or forgiveness. Forgiveness in the family. The family is meant to be the safest place, yet it is often where the deepest wounds are inflicted. Many have grown up with coldness, harsh words, or even violence from their own parents or siblings. Brothers and sisters fight out of jealousy. Parents may unknowingly leave scars that remain in their children's hearts for a lifetime. In such circumstances, resentment easily takes root. Some grow up carrying bitterness, vowing never to forgive their families. But the story of Joseph reminds us that no matter how painful family wounds may be, forgiveness can still open the way to a new future. Forgiving within a family does not mean pretending nothing happened. Forgiveness means choosing not to let those wounds continue to control your life. Like Joseph, who did not deny what his brothers had done, yet refused to let their betrayal dictate the future of the family. When a child forgives a parent or siblings forgive one another, it brings freedom not only to themselves but to an entire generation. Many families fall apart because no one is willing to let go of the past. But one decision to forgive can reconnect broken ties and bring peace to children and grandchildren yet to come. Forgiveness in society. Beyond the family, today's world is filled with conflicts, disputes, and injustice. From small quarrels in neighborhoods to deep divisions of race, religion, and politics, these struggles leave wounds that are difficult to heal. When there is no forgiveness, hatred breeds more hatred. We see this in wars that have lasted for decades, where new generations continue to suffer from the grudges of the past. Yet history also shows that only forgiveness can open the door to a new chapter. Think of South Africa after the era of apartheid. If the nation had chosen revenge, it might have been drowned in bloodshed. But through reconciliation and through the courage of people willing to forgive, South Africa was able to move forward in peace. This is proof that forgiveness is not only a personal act, but also a foundation for building a just and compassionate society. In everyday life, the same truth applies. A community cannot prosper if people cling to resentment. When neighbors are willing to overlook each other's faults, when communities choose dialogue instead of violence, that is the power of forgiveness at work. Forgiveness in personal life, not only in family or society, but within each of us, there are personal wounds. They may come from betrayal in love, injustice at work, or harsh words from a friend. Some wounds may seem small, but they fester quietly, becoming heavy burdens on the soul. Many believe that holding on to resentment is a way to protect themselves. In reality, resentment is like an invisible chain binding us to the past. Every time we remember, we suffer the pain again. The one who hurt us may have forgotten and moved on, yet we remain imprisoned in bitter memories. That is why forgiveness is not just a gift to others, but a gift we give ourselves. When we forgive, we break the chains and our souls find freedom. Forgiveness does not change the past, but it changes how we step into the future. This is not easy. Forgiveness is a process often requiring inner struggle. But like Joseph, when we see a greater meaning, when we trust that God can turn everything into good, we will find the strength to let go. Forgiveness and true freedom. In today's world, people speak often of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom to live as one wishes. Yet, there is one kind of freedom rarely mentioned: freedom from resentment. As long as we cling to hatred, we are not truly free. Freedom is not only being free from oppression by others, but being free from letting the past control us. Forgiveness is the path to that freedom. Joseph is living proof. Though sold into slavery, though cast into prison, he was free in his soul because he did not let resentment reign in his heart. And when he forgave, he became truly powerful, not only in political authority, but in the power of love and mercy. Forgiveness in society and in personal life all reveal its unseen yet mighty strength. Forgiveness is not easy, but once we choose it, we open the door to peace, healing, and hope. This is the timeless message the story of Joseph brings. People may cause wounds, but each of us has the power to choose how we respond. And to choose forgiveness is to choose life. Forgiveness as liberation. After all the trials, from betrayal to exile to reunion and forgiveness, the story of Joseph does not end as just another biblical tale. It stands as a distilled message for every generation. What makes it endure through the ages is not only its dramatic details, but the spiritual force at its core, the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness, the liberation of the soul. Within every person, there are wounds. Some are caused by others, but some are self-inflicted when we cannot let go. Many live their entire lives carrying the weight of bitterness, only to realize too late that they themselves are the ones imprisoned. Joseph showed another way. He had every reason to hate, betrayed by his brothers, stripped of his freedom, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Yet he did not let those things turn him into a bitter man. He chose forgiveness, and through it, his soul was free. Forgiveness does not change what happened, but it changes the meaning we attach to it. Instead of seeing betrayal as the end, Joseph saw it as the beginning of God's greater plan. That choice released him from invisible chains. Forgiveness, strength beyond hatred. In this world, many believe that true strength lies in revenge, in the ability to make others kneel. But Joseph's story reverses that belief. Real strength is not in retaliation, but in self-control, in daring to forgive when you hold the power to punish. When Joseph held supreme authority, he could have made his brothers pay. Yet he opened his arms instead. In that moment, he became the strongest man, not only in Egypt, but in human history. For only those who are truly free within can forgive those who have wounded them most deeply. Hatred breeds more hatred. Forgiveness cuts through that cycle. It is a strength that rises above retributive justice, opening the way to a higher justice, the justice of love. Forgiveness, a path to the future. If Joseph had chosen revenge, the story would have ended in blood and tears. Jacob's family would have collapsed. The line of Israel would have been destroyed, and history would have turned dark. But because Joseph chose forgiveness, the future was opened. His family was saved. The people of Israel multiplied in Goshen, and from there grew into a great nation. Forgiveness not only changes the present, it creates the future. It is like a seed planted in barren ground. Today, it may look like silence or letting go, but tomorrow it can grow into a forest of peace and hope. The same is true for us. If we cling to hatred, we pass bitterness to the next generation. But if we forgive, we pass down peace. Forgiveness is a gift, not only for ourselves, but for those who come after us. Forgiveness, a journey, not a moment. Joseph's story also shows that forgiveness is not easy. It is not a single decision made in 1 second, but a long journey. Joseph endured years, from the pit to Potiphar's house, to prison, to the palace. At every stage, he learned to trust God, to release little by little. By the time he faced his brothers, he was truly ready to forgive. This reminds us that forgiveness does not have to be instant. Some wounds take time. What matters is that we are moving in the right direction, toward release, not feeding resentment. Forgiveness, the mark of maturity. As children, we often think simply, if someone hurts me, I must hurt them back. But with maturity, we see that revenge never restores what was lost. Forgiveness is the sign of inner maturity. It is the step from instinct to humanity, from selfishness to love. Joseph matured not only in age, but in spirit. From a young man sold in tears, he became someone who could see beyond his own pain to God's plan of salvation for an entire people. Forgiveness, a spiritual legacy. What remained after Joseph's life was not only full granaries or political power. What remained was a spiritual legacy, the testimony of forgiveness. That is why his story has been told for thousands of years. It transcends Israel, it transcends religion, and it becomes a lesson for all humanity. When we read the story today, we do not only see ancient history, we see ourselves. For each of us has both a Joseph and a brother in our lives. Sometimes we are the betrayed, and the message is the same for both. Forgiveness is always possible, and forgiveness is the only path to freedom. The distilled message. The story of Joseph closes with the image of a family reunited, a people saved, and a heart set free. Yet its timeless message still echoes. Forgiveness is not because others deserve it, but because we choose to release the burden and live free. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it opens the way to a new future. Forgiveness does not make us weak, it makes us the strongest of all. In a world still filled with hatred, forgiveness may well be the most revolutionary act. It breaks invisible chains, opens the door to peace, and plants the seeds of hope for generations to come. And that is Joseph's greatest legacy, the proof that human beings can choose to forgive. And when we choose forgiveness, we choose life. The story of Joseph closes with a powerful message. Betrayal can break the heart, but forgiveness can save an entire nation. In the very moment Joseph opened his arms to embrace his brother's, history was rewritten. He had the power to take revenge, yet he chose a higher path, the path of mercy. And that choice opened a new future, not only for his family, but for all of Israel. What we can carry with us today is this: true strength does not lie in the ability to strike back, but in the courage to forgive. Forgiveness does not only transform others, first and foremost, it transforms us. It frees the soul from the weight of bitterness, allowing us to live in freedom and peace. If you believe that forgiveness can change a life, make sure to subscribe and share this video. And do not miss the next episode in this Bible series, where we will uncover even more extraordinary stories.